So we are able to add elements to this list, but at the moment, if I then click an element on that list, I add it again. I duplicate it, basically. And that's not what I want. Instead, if I click an item here in that dream locations list, I want to remove it from that list. And I also want to make sure that items I selected down there disappear from here and are added up here. And if I then remove them up here, they should be re-added down there, so that items basically switch between these two lists. That's my next goal. Now let's start with making sure that clicking an item in that upper list sends a delete request. At the moment, we always send a post request because we added HX post on that location item and we're using that same item in both lists. Now, one way of sending a delete request here in that upper list would be to accept a second argument in this render location function that could be named isAvailableLocation or anything like that. And we can assign a default value of true, for example. And I'll use this argument to determine which attributes should be added to the button, so that I can basically tell this function in which kind of list I'm using this item, if it's the available locations list or the interesting locations list. So therefore we could then add an attributes variable here and check if isAvailableLocation, if that is true. And in that case, I want to set attributes to a list of attributes, or to a string that includes multiple attributes to be precise, where I have this post and this vals attribute, and where I also have the target and swap attributes. So I'll cut them from the button down there and instead add them here in this string, in this attributes string. And then, of course, down there at the button, I'll inject this attributes string so that in the end, on the rendered button element, these attributes will be present again. But now we can also define an else case. So if that location is rendered in the interesting locations list instead of the available locations list, and in that else case, the attributes should be different. Because in that else case, we want to send a delete request with HX delete, and that delete request should be sent to this delete route here. So to /places and then /some ID, the ID of the place that should be deleted. So to /places, and then I'll dynamically inject the ID of the place for which I'm rendering this location item, which I can get from this location argument, because there it's location.id. That will give me the ID of the place that should be removed from this list. So that will then send this delete request. In addition, here, I want to make sure that I ask the user whether they really want to continue, and we can do that with HX confirm, as you learned. And here I'll simply ask, are you sure? That should make sure that we send that delete request. Now in app.js, in this delete route, I am then removing that place, which I identify by its ID, from the interesting locations array, and I send back an empty response. And as you learned, if you send back an empty response, you can use that empty response to replace some element with it, and therefore to effectively delete it from the DOM. Back in location.js, I want to tweak those attributes in case I'm sending that delete request, and I want to target the element that should be removed from the DOM. So I want to target this list item. We can target that with closest li. Keep in mind that the attributes are rendered here, and the closest list item seen relative from that button is that list item here. So that will make sure that this list item as a whole is targeted. To then remove it, and not just its contents, we also should set HX swap to outer HTML. That will then entirely get rid of that list item. And that should therefore be all the code we need to delete an item. Now with those changes made, if I save everything and I reload, I am able to add places, but when I then click a place, I still duplicate it. Now strangely, if I reload and then click an item, I instead get the intended behavior. I get this prompt and I can click OK to then delete it. But why does this not happen if I just added it and I then click on it? Why is it then still duplicated? Well, it's then still duplicated because, of course, we must utilize this is available location parameter here. We must pass a value for it if it should be other than true, so if it should be false. And currently I'm not really doing that. I mean, I am indeed doing it in index.js. There it was part of the starting code, this false argument here in the interesting locations list. But if I add a new location with this route, and I return that rendered list item, I do not set this second argument here. And we should do that. We should pass false as a second argument to render location here to make sure that these newly created items, which are injected into the DOM and into the page after this post request was sent, are also marked as items that are in that interesting places list. And with that change made, indeed now, if we reload, if I add items and I then click on them, I also get that intended behavior. And that's therefore another step in the right direction.